5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to Relentless. This is the show for high performers who are driven and committed to being at their best. Nick Peterson and Jonathan Montgomery, co-founders of Relentless Dietetics, are your hosts.
Welcome to the Relentless Podcast. I'm Nick Peterson, hanging out today with Jonathan Montgomery.
What is up?
And the Dr. Trevor Cashy.
Hello.
As per usual, we're here to discuss getting better every day. Last week, we just kind of grazed over some of the biggest mistakes we see people making. And we kind of asked our audience, we asked you guys to let us know what you wanted us to dig a little deeper into. That way we know that we're delivering the value that you need and giving you the action steps that'll help you immediately.
I'll sit in a room with you guys and we could talk to each other all day. But apparently people are actually, indeed listening to us and kind of like hearing us talk enough so that they let us know what they wanted to talk about, more moving forward. So who'd have thunk it? Like Nick has just said, as a result, we're going to dig in a bit more on a couple of topics from last week and make a few episodes out of them. So hopefully it's going to resonate and provide some value to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to talk about what I call brackets. And this is one of the few things I think that the three of us use different language, because sometimes we sit in a room and we just say the same thing. And it's something that we don't talk about, or I personally don't talk about enough, because it's so built into our program and the way we operate and everything we do that we kind of take it for granted, kind of assume that it's a given. But I sent out an email about it, got an overwhelming response. And basically the email says, you do not want to be as lean and as strong as you can possibly be. You want to be as lean and as strong as you can possibly be while still spending time with your kids, maybe going out with the wife and having date night, maybe having a beer on the weekends, because that's where you're happiest. And that is something we just kind of assume everybody takes into account. And according to my inbox and the Facebook response, it's something that is not common. And the suggestion is that maybe you guys want to hear a little bit more about it. So I call it brackets. The brackets of, hey, I got to spend time with my family. Obviously I have to go to work. Like, these are the things that I need to make decisions and consider. So I've heard it called bumpers. We've called it a fence. And Trevor, I think last week you mentioned the intention intervention gap.
The intention intervention gap is something that I touch on and bring up pretty much as humanly possible. One, because I think it's fun to say. I like rhymes and I like alliteration. And this seems to have a little bit of both in some degree, or mostly just rhyming. In any case, the intention intervention gap is that people want stuff, whether tangible or not. Like, you want to reach a goal, you want a thing, whatever. And you have intent. So you want to do something. And then you have the intervention side, which is, okay, I want something, but now I actually have to do it. And then there is that, I guess, energy gap is what they would call it in chemistry. But basically, like, there's this distance between you wanting to do something and you actually having to do it to get there. And the wider that gap is, the less likely you are going to follow through with whatever your intentions are. And the concept of brackets, as Nick pointed out, I like to use the term bumpers. I like the term bumper in a bowling alley, where, like, most people know really what direction they need to go and they know what to do. But for whatever reason, that 1 mile race turns into like a 35-mile squiggly line, whatever you want to call it, to get to where they need to be. And so I like to integrate the concept of bumpers and brackets to kind of basically show you the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit and keep you focused on what's going on. And Nick also mentioned, wanting to look your best and be your best and feel your best. But that's not entirely what people want in the context of, well, if you have to sacrifice a bunch of other stuff to get there, it may not be worth it. And so this is where expectation management comes into play, where really your highest achievability is not necessarily your highest maintainability. And these are two values that you should know. And so when you go to accomplish the things you want to accomplish, you know what your maximum capacity is, but you're also aware of that your maximum capacity may be drawing from other facets of your life you would rather not sacrifice. And so you have an idea of, here's the maximum that I can do in this particular thing, but here's the maximum I can do when I'm still achieving some balance in my life. So it's important to differentiate maximum achievability versus maximum maintainability. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of like one of the things we keyed on into last week is just because you could do something, it doesn't mean that you necessarily should do it. Just because you could get to 4% body fat doesn't really mean that you should if you realize you're going to get a divorce out of the outcome. I think honestly what it really boils down to is when all the things are factored in and an emphasis is placed on your overall quality of life, the equation looks a lot more like just because you can do something doesn't mean you will actually do it in terms of sticking with it, following through, or executing it effectively. And I think that's where that perfect concept of that intention intervention gap comes into play. And honestly, that's because for most people, quality of life, balance, and just living the dream kind of supersedes all those extremes. And honestly, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad place to be. Trevor has just said, you just got to be aware that just because you could do the max doesn't mean you're going to enjoy it the most. And I think that's where you really need to have that focus and have that ability to be honest with yourself.
I'd hazard a guess that really the maximum achievability is what people think quality of life is. And I will tell you right now, that is absolutely not the case. If you are trying to push something to the limit, then you have to sacrifice other things in your life by default. So there is a little bit of masochism going on if you're looking for maximum anything, because you got to disassemble the east wall to rebuild the west wall. And that's something where we try and help kind of bridge that disconnect a little bit, because the quality of life and the maximum achievable results, people tend to connect them. And I'm just going to repeat it again. That is just not the case. The maximum achievable result is not the same as the maximum maintainable one. And the maximum achievable result is one that by default pulls from other areas of your life that you'd probably rather not sacrifice. So I'm just going to lay that out and have it repeated to drill it home.
I think one thing too, and it's kind of a gray area, people don't realize that the maximum maintainability, which is awesome language, I like that just as much as intention intervention gap, but the maximum maintainability is still pretty darn good for most people.
Yeah, but it's not the best. And if I don't have the best, I don't want anything.
It sounds a whole lot like some petty competitors to me.
Yeah. I will settle for nothing less than the best. Okay.
Well, if that were true, you'd be good at something.
Yeah, that's true too. So from a practical application standpoint, and assuming that maximum maintainability in the long run is a better end result anyway, because for most people it really is, what we must do then, and this is what the brackets are, is guard the essential aspects of your life, the things that are essential to your happiness, your well-being, your quality of life. Time with your wife, time with your kids, time to go fishing, time to read books, whatever it is. You have to guard these things, or you will almost certainly run out of willpower, lose interest, be exhausted, and be miserable. So really, from a practical application standpoint, I think the first step is being honest about what those essential aspects of your life really are.
I'm going to agree here and turn it around. And again, this is something that I learned in science. One of the very first things I learned in the context of practical science is that if you want to learn how something works, you got to break it, right? You're driving a car, you don't know how the parts of the car work, remove the steering wheel, you figure out pretty fast how the steering wheel works. I think a lot of the crises people have are because they may not know what makes them happy, which is why they have these goals that, maybe to us are obvious that it will not improve the quality of a person's life, but to them it may. So going through these processes, I 100% agree that guarding the things that make you happy are important, and when you go through this process, you will find out the things that are important along the way.
And that's kind of what you have introduced to me and then subsequently built into the program. And that's a series of like Socratic questioning to figure out what people actually want, what is essential to them. And that's something that I think when we first opened RD, that Jonathan, you really deep dived into how to ask the right questions, right? How to figure out what is important to people and how do you do that?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, that maximum maintainability. For me, that's a great point to key in on. For some people, let's look at professional athletes, people getting paid for their pursuits. Those extremes may be necessary. That ends may be worth the means. The same could be said for highest performers in any space, whether it's an artist or an entrepreneur or a fit pro or anything like that. For some people, those extreme results may be required, and therefore the extreme measures must be taken. And that may be kind of part of happiness. But the thing is, like you said, when it comes to asking questions and kind of what we do with RD is ask yourself, is this you? That's something you're going to have to dig deep on. That's something we're going to push you with. Do you really want this goal to be placed above all else in your life? Are you really willing to do anything to get it? Or do you simply want it and do you feel good saying it? Do you feel great identifying as someone that'll do anything to reach your goal when the reality is nowhere close to that? And I think that's kind of one of those things where we want to really put into a realistic, expectation congruent with reality is, are you really willing to do what it takes and give up what you have to get where you want to be? And by and large, for most people, that answer is no.
If you're ready to get the body you desire without depriving yourself of the foods you enjoy, download your free diet playbook now at www.relentlesspodcast.com.
It's interesting how often people say, I will do anything, and really they mean I will do anything except this list of things. But to find that point of maintainability, and I'm sure it's a range, like sometimes life allows you to be a little stricter than other times. But if you find that range, at least for me and what Trevor, you've helped me do, I'm pretty confident that with these brackets I have in place, that all of my efforts and ideas and things I want to do are measured against these logistical and lifestyle brackets. And now in the case of business and financial, I do the same thing. It really ensures the maximum quality of life. Like as long as I'm inching forward within these brackets, things are just getting better.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, for me, is ask yourself, is it worth missing out on your kid's soccer game or miss going out on your anniversary to close a deal? Are you the type of person that can physically be able to go on your once a year vacation where you escape from life and eat tuna and twigs without binging at the buffet at night, because you're depressed because of it? Ask yourself those questions before you commit to these extremes and want those extreme results.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but it just keeps happening. Like, people are consistently surprised, especially at RD, because people are just weird about food, how much progress they make without having to go outside of those brackets when they're set appropriately. Like multiple times, I never thought I could make this much progress and still enjoy this much of my life. Again, just piggybacking off what you just said, that the questions about, is it worth it? And what am I getting into? When you start a new plan, if it does not force you to consider what are your brackets, what are you willing to give up, there's a good chance you're going to end up going the wrong direction or being miserable.
This is a good point to bring up because one of the first things you said is to protect the things that you think are important in your life. And a lot of people may find that the things they're protecting are not improving the quality of their life at all.
What you guys are both kind of alluding to is just being self-aware. Are you aware of the things you're trying to protect? Are you aware of the things you're willing to give up? And as we've said time and time again, suffering does not always equal success. And most people don't have to suffer as much as they think they do. Considering some of the scenarios that we mentioned, whether it's missing the kid's soccer game or starving on vacation or whatever it is, just ask yourself and be brutally honest. Would any of those scenarios, if you completed them, if you starved on vacation, missed the anniversary, would they make you happy or feel accomplished? Or is happy for you not nearly as important as the goal? Does it sound like a choice you're going to be willingly make or a sacrifice you're willing to accept repeatedly as a means to an end? Because, where I sit and having seen, the people come through RD, the thousands of people we worked with, if you could honestly say yes to that question, if it was worth it to you, then I don't think there'd be a need for any discourse or for you to really be listening to this episode, because you'd already know where you'd stand. You'd know you're a completely imbalanced individual. You'd know you'd have a sole focus. You'd have long since came to terms with this, and you'd be just fine with it. I think that's like a little bit of that self-awareness that's missing when people really try to tackle some of these goals. Is if you were already there, you'd know it. You'd be there. You'd have no problems with it.
I think it's important to understand, especially when you're listening to us, like the three of us just talk about something, and we're not here to tell you what is supposed to be important to you. I don't think for a minute that what's important to me should be important to anybody else. But if you want to get better every day, you do have to know what's important to you. And you have to make your decisions again within those brackets, within those bumpers.
Yeah, I'll definitely key in on this before we get too much further in this and wrap up, is that, both personally, because quite frankly, all three of us have been that imbalanced at one point or another in some form or fashion to where the goal did trump everything else, but also professionally through working with so many people with RD. It really often seems that the highest quality of life for people comes not from trying to achieve that best end all scenario, or even try to have the best of both worlds, which a lot of people try to do, which is equitable to trying to ride two horses with one ass. It doesn't work out so well. But instead of best of both worlds, trying to achieve enough in each of them so that one doesn't completely negate or take away from the other. I think there really is something to that whole balance thing. And that's something I know that we've found out, we've helped quite a few people find out, is that literally sometimes it's just not the best you can be, but it's the best that you can do, and that maximum maintainability again. That's just such a solid concept.
Yeah, I'm going to use it all the time now. I think that's one of the best things. Better than anybody. First really introduced when Trevor came and started working with general population, and subsequently RD has become really good at it, is establishing, like, we pretty much force people to sit there and think about what is actually important to you before we start giving you directions. And it's just been, the results have been profound for long-term sustainable success. And the people that go through RD just aren't miserable, because being miserable sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Well, on that note, I guess we're just going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for listening, guys. And just remember, if your intention is intervention, then just make sure your maintainability is at the maximum. We out.
You've been listening to the Relentless Podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to keep getting a little bit better every day, do us a favor, head over to iTunes, subscribe, leave us an honest review, and be sure not to miss the next one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.